Now I have added a few more data like the password, permanent, join date and login time and stuff like that. You may need to pause the video to get jot down these values. It may be helpful in making sure you don't make any mistakes. And if you're curious about what data type it is, from which package, I'm getting it from java.sql.date, and this is java.util.gregorian calendar. So this is my data. Now let us run this particular data contents, and here we can see that we have all this particular data. Now I want to add a few more records so that when we are dealing with HQL, when we are learning HQL, we'll have some data to play around with. Before we go to that, I want to talk about this generate values, that is generate primary keys. Now in this particular example, I'm setting the employee ID to 100 and the next record maybe I want it as 101, 102 and stuff like that. Instead of us playing around with these primary keys, imagine a situation where you really don't want to set the primary key and all you want to do is you want Hibernate to take care of the primary key. That how to make Hibernate generate the primary keys? All you have to do is go to this particular employee class and to the getter method, and in this particular getter method you can just go to this below this ID, or it doesn't matter where exactly it is. You annotate this particular employee ID column with @g control space generated value from javax.persistence generated value, and that's it. When you say generated value, what happens is Hibernate will ensure that every record that you insert, you don't have to set the primary key, it will generate a primary key. Now I've come back to this particular object and I have commented out alex.set employee ID, and now I'm going to recreate the table. I have uncommented out the schema export to save it, and now run this particular class, refresh the schema. Let us go to our employee info, and then you can see that it has auto generated the primary key as 1 and stuff like that. For now, let us go and add a few more records to this particular employee table. I have added a few more records. I just copy pasted these things and changed some values here and there. You can do the same thing. Let us call, right click, run as Java application, check, make sure you refresh, and then you can go to this employee info. If you notice, I did not give the employee ID because I know Hibernate is going to auto generate for me. Data, sample contents, and then we have all these records. Now let's have a look at this generated value annotation a little bit more in depth. First, if you notice right here in the results, it was automatically able to generate the employee IDs. Good. But let me show you something. If I go to the test employee, and if I'm going to comment out this new schema export and then save it, and I'm going to run this particular program once again, that means it's going to once again insert all these records and it's going to generate new primary keys. Now if I run this, right click, run as Java application, and then now if I go to the database and refresh the schema, and then if I look at the data, employee info, sample contents. Now if you observe the data here, you'll notice that the first 5 records, it's the same records that have been inserted. The first 5 records started with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it made this massive jump. So what does that mean? If you have this particular tag generated value, if you have this tag generated value, all it says is Hibernate will generate a primary key for you and it will ensure that it will be unique. But it does not ensure that it will follow a sequence. Now This may be fine in certain cases when you're not worried about your primary key, but in this case, I don't want my employee IDs jumping all over the place. I want to maintain a sequence. As and when I add records, I want them to maintain a sequence. So what should I do to ensure that there is a sequence? Now, you can go after this particular annotation, generated value, and then there is something called as a strategy. str control space strategy equal to generation type control space generation type, and then put a dot. Now totally there are 4 different strategies to generate the primary keys. By default, it takes the auto generation. That's exactly what we saw. It ensures that there is a primary key and it will be unique, but it does not ensure that there will be a sequence. Identity is nothing but auto will by default take the identity generation type. Auto and identity are one and the same. The next one is the sequence generation. For the sequence generation, the database, whatever database you're using, should support something called as a sequence object. Unfortunately, our database DB does not support the sequence object, but then we don't have to worry. We have something called as a table generation. If you look at like production level code, most of them prefer to use the table generation because it is very powerful and we can like have a very good control over the sequence. Now let's have a look at this table generation. Okay. Now I have given the strategy as table generation, and now let us give a name for this generation type table. To give a name for the generation strategy, you just have to say gen control space generator equal to, and here you can give any name. I'm just going to give a name, say something like EMP ID or something like that. Now go right on top of it or below it, doesn't matter. You have to give another annotation called table generator. Give another annotation called table generator, and now you have to give whatever the generator name you gave here, you will have to give it here too. It has this property called name, and the name I gave here is employee ID, so I'll give the name right here, comma. Now let us give another property called table equal to, and like let us give some name for this table. Like I'm going to say like EMP primary key table. We will see what this does. And then the next property is pk control space primary key column name equal to, we'll give something called as like EMP key, and then another property pk control space primary key column value equal to, and then we can say like EMP value. So let me put this on the next line so that it will be like much more visible for you. And then let us give another property saying allocation size control space equal to, let's give an allocation size of say 1. Now we will see what this exactly does, and then go to the test employee, and then we will like uncommon the schema export because I want the table to be dropped and then like recreated so that we can see the effect of this particular table generator, what it does. Okay, so let's go run this, and then we can go and like refresh this particular schema and then look at the table values. And now if you notice, it has created a table called EMP PKTB, same thing that I gave right here, and then it has given like in that particular table, if you go look at it, data sample contents, if you go take a look at it, it has created like those 2 columns, the primary key column name and then the primary key column value. And then in this particular table you will notice that it has the key and value, and here it says like this is the employee value, and the employee value is like 6. That means it has inserted the particular data in the employee info, and the next sequence in that is going to be 6. Now to test it out if our sequence works, all we have to do is go back to our test employee, comment this guy again, and then let's run this out. Cool. Now let's go refresh this particular schema, go to the table, And here if you notice, it has maintained the particular sequence. Because the allocation size was 1, it has maintained, like, for every record it will, like, increment by 1. And you can always notice, like, what is the next primary key going to be. You can query this particular table, and over here you will notice that the next sequence value is going to be 11. So this way we can have a tremendous control over what kind of a primary key will be generated. So once again, if you want to have a control over your sequence, you just have to say generated value, create, like, a strategy, and I would always suggest use the table generation type strategy, and then give some name for the generator, and then right on top of it you can give this annotation table generation. Use the same name that you gave to the generator to the name, and then give some name for the table. This table is going to store our sequence, and then give a, like, a key and value pair, and then allocation size you can give it, like, 1 or 10 or 100, and see what is the difference, how the numbers jump around. Okay.